My play of the day from round 5 of the Wijk aan Zee tournament is the game between Rapport and Dominguez. Richard Rapport, a very exciting player indeed, just 18 years old, and always plays some very enterprising and often original chess, and we see that in his opening today. He played g4 in this position, so this is a kind of grob, delayed grob you could say, so white gained space on the king side. Now there's method in his madness, it's not quite as crazy as it looks. Let's see what happened. Dominguez continued developing normally, didn't panic against this. And let me show you an example of how White's strategy can work very well. This is a previous game between two Serbian players, and you can see that White is gaining space on the king side. Now, I'm not saying that Black played this terribly well, but it does give an illustration of the kind of strategic dangers for Black in this position. So White wants to play the knight to f4 here and take this bishop off. Black plays e5, and now strategically White is doing extremely well. So Black advances the pawn, White captures en passant, and you can see now that White has a huge positional advantage, and it's really because of that pawn advancing to g5. It's managed to knock out Black's f-pawn, and that means that in this position White has established control over d4 square. This knight can't be driven away by an f-pawn, so White simply has a big positional advantage here. Okay, let's go back. So that's the kind of thing that Black has to be careful of. Okay, Dominguez kept playing very sensibly, normal moves, so now there's a simple threat of bishop takes g4, White advanced again. Okay, now e6 from Black, just wanting to develop very normally and hoping perhaps to bring a knight to f5 now that the pawn has advanced to g5. So Rapport continued with his pawn advance. Well, if he plays h5, then this can be a bit irritating for Black, because you never know whether this is going to advance one step further or maybe exchange on g6. So I think Dominguez played very well here. He blocked the h-pawn very simply, and if this is captured en passant, then, well, it helps Black's development, that's one thing, and also this pawn could turn out to be weak. I mean, White hasn't benefited at all from the advance of the g-pawn. So Rapport came up with an interesting strategy here. He exchanged bishop for knight on c6. Looks at first glance a little bit odd to exchange off that nice bishop on g2, but the pawns are now doubled, which does restrict Black's flexibility here with these pawns. Let me try to explain that one. For example, and now f4 was the follow-up. Let me describe how this could possibly work to White's advantage. If knight e7, if Black just continues developing normally, then White starts to have a real clap on Black's centre. Now maybe e4 is a good move here, but maybe queen d2. This is interesting. What I want to do is play b3 and bishop b2, and perhaps even exchange off the dark square bishops. That might be nice to try and get a piece here. And if Black were to play d5, then, well, I'll probably play b3 anyway. And you can see that now the double pawns, in particular the pawn on c5, is very weak. It's just like some positions in the Nimzo-Indian defence. This is what White is aiming for. And sometimes White can even, much later on, advance with e4 and e5 to undermine the protection for the pawn on c5. So this is the big idea. And Dominguez thought for a few minutes here, and I think came up with an excellent counter strategy. he advanced with e5, so taking the fight to white straight away. The point is, well, one of the ideas is simply to open up the line of this bishop. So this takes advantage of the fact that white has given up his light squared bishop. So black's light square bishop suddenly has excellent prospects on the king side, particularly as these pawns have advanced, and that pawn will be a really nice anchor for the bishop coming to g4. Rapport exchanged and played knight f3. He's hoping to gain time. Maybe the bishop goes back, or, well, checking doesn't benefit black at all because the king comes to g2 and the bishop is rather embarrassed. Now, I would have anticipated bishop g7 in this position, but instead Dominguez exchanged on c3. Bit of a surprise. He's done exactly as Rapport has done. Now, why has he done this? Well, first of all, it means that with these pawns doubled, it's not easy for white to bring his bishop over to the king side to try and get in on these squares. That's one thing. So it's not so dangerous. But it simply gains time, actually. And Dominguez realizes that he can develop a very powerful initiative if he develops very, very quickly. So that's the idea behind the exchange. Rapport develops as well. And now, well, you know, black just wants to play bishop g4 and hammer down the e-file. So Rapport plays the knight to d2, and he perhaps wants to bring the knight in here. And that sort of forces the pawn up the board, but I don't think Dominguez was unhappy about playing this move. Now, of course, it does weaken this pawn, but black doesn't worry about that because his big prize is the king. In this position, white is struggling to find a safe square for his king. After bishop g4, I think we can see that very clearly. The king side is not going to be a happy place for the king. But on the other side of the board, of course, white is fairly open there as well. Of course, in the meantime, white has to worry about the pawn on e2. That's why Rapport played rook h2 to defend the e-pawn, but that is a pretty ugly move. You know, there is now little connection between the rooks, and by contrast, black's position looks like a picture of harmony, actually. I mean, black's moves, I think, are very simple here. He would just like to clear the e-file and hammer down here. Now, I think white's best move is to castle queenside here, and it looks pretty bizarre, but at least there might be a chance to connect the rooks. And on this side of the board, the king is at least close to the queen, which can help with the defence. I still prefer black's position here, but I think that might be a chance, white's best chance. Rapport's played instead rook b1. Well, I understand he wants to bring a rook to the open file, but in the meantime, you can see that now white's king is stuck in the middle of the board. It cannot castle. So running away from black's attack is not going to be easy. And Dominguez just built up very steadily, so the pressure is increasing on the e-file, and he had a particular idea in mind. It looks as though he's neglected the defence of this pawn, and is this a problem for black? No, he had prepared this strike. Very nice indeed. If rook takes bishop, queen g4, this looks like a kind of slow motion attack for black. In fact, it's even though it's very slow, it is quite convincing. First of all, the bishop is attacked. If the bishop tries to block the e-file, this doesn't really help. Now, really white can't avoid what's going to happen next. If the king tries to run, then you play rook takes bishop, and you win the piece back with a crushing attack, actually. You can see white's big problem in all these variations is that the queen simply cannot aid white's king with the defence, and whereas black's queen and knight and the rook will enter the attack very quickly and finish off the king. Even if white escape to an endgame, these pawns are vulnerable. So this is the basic problem. Rapport went to the side with the king. Now queen g4 anyway. And he just snapped a pawn off, and this is very nasty for white. The rook is attacked. If king takes bishop, then knight f5 check, and the king has to keep hold of the rook, and well, this is very embarrassing indeed. If the king comes here, queen g4 is actually mate. And if rook takes bishop, then queen takes bishop, and the attack continues. So bishop e3 was played, but this doesn't really help. If rook takes, then black just crashes through, and king takes knight, then rook check, and it's going to be mate very soon. So Rapport sacrificed the exchange. Typically, he realised he was going down, and he gambles. He tries to complicate the position as much as possible. Best chance in this situation. He knows he's lost, so he may as well just throw everything at black. Now, if Dominguez relaxes here, then white will be in. For example, if this pawn is taken, then suddenly black's king could be in some danger with these threats, and don't forget the rook coming down. So black has to maintain the initiative. Dominguez appreciated that and played with great energy. He simply took the bishop with the rook. If Rapport tries to break through to the king, in fact he can't do that because the rook comes back, and black is a rook up here, and black wins very easily. Rapport took this rook, but now the rook checks and the queen comes here. Now, although black is no material up for the time being, you can see that white's king is in terrible trouble. There's going to be a discovered check. This knight is en prise. I mean, it's completely lost. So the only thing that white can do is keep attacking. So Rapport just has to check. And, well, this is a tricky move. If the king goes to the wrong square, then that is a very nasty discovered check. This is you can see how tricky Rapport is, but Dominguez steps to the right square with the king, and rook b8, still very tricky indeed. That means that Dominguez can't use the rook in the attack because of this pin, but there is one way to win, which he finds. Now if the king goes back, that's going to be mate on c2. Rapport took the bishop, but now it's forced checkmate, and here he resigned. Black has a choice of queen takes c4 mate or queen e3 checkmate. So a really convincing display from Dominguez, who advances up the table. He now has 3 points out of 5. He's still behind the leader. Levon Aronian had a very good day today. He won again, proving how deadly the Berlin defence can be of the Spanish. He won a beautiful technical game with black. Thanks for watching.